But you know, I want this care for my mother this badly that I think even though that she is 85, she needs a hip replacement because I don't want to see her die in a wheelchair. That's a different world than that we have today, and I'd be happy to yield to the Speaker.
Suspend. The Chair will receive a message.
Mr. Speaker, a message from the Senate.
Mr. Speaker,
Madam Secretary.
I have been directed by the Senate to inform the House that the Senate has agreed with an amendment to H.J. Res. 59, making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2014 and for other purposes, in which the concurrence of the House is requested.
The gentleman from Iowa may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I ask the Speaker the number of that H.J. Res. that's just been messaged? I missed that.
H.J. Res. 59.
H.J. Res. 59, continuing resolution.
Mr. Speaker, I thank you for that response, and now that tells me, Mr. Speaker, that we've just gotten messaged to us the CR, the continuing resolution from the United States Senate, that the vote had concluded over on the other side, down the other end through the rotunda. And the Senate has now acted to peel out the ban on funding for Obamacare and send us back what they would call a clean CR with their changes and provisions, which would include a continuing resolution up until November 15th. So it is a shorter-term CR than we offered to them. But what it says is we as senators are not going to, we're not going to fund Obamacare, or we're not going to let you prohibit the funding of Obamacare. And so again, we're back to the center and the crux of this. Another dramatic event has taken place here in the United States Capitol. And the drama of this now is in the lap of the House of Representatives, where our Speaker has just received the message of H.J. Res. 59, the CR. Now we have a decision to make. And my message, Mr. Speaker, is this. If 218 House members hold our ground, if we say we will not fund Obamacare and we will not fund an appropriation that fails to cut off the funding to Obamacare, if we hold our ground, we will win. This contest now that's going on, it's a contest of wills. And there's a relatively narrow majority in the Senate. There's a little bit broader majority in the House, I believe. And the strength of will is being measured. This is like holding a gun on each other now, standing in a burning building and deciding who's going to blink. But we can't just let down the hammer and stand there because the building is burning. Somebody's got to walk away from this confrontation and say, I'm going to give you your way. Well, my message to this, Mr. Speaker, is that we've heard this message over and over again. If there is a government shutdown, House Republicans will always lose in a confrontation with the President. I don't know that that's true. And I don't know that it even was true in 1995 and 96 when there was a government shutdown that lasted for 21 days. What I do know is this House sent the funding to keep our government open over to the Senate. With it was language that said no funding to implement or enforce Obamacare. It happens that's language that I wrote and presented here in this Congress in February of 2011. We have said we want this government to stay open. We want to avoid a shutdown, avoid a shutdown, avoid a shutdown. If we repeat that enough times, it might be sending a message to the senators that we really don't mean it when we say that we're not going to fund Obamacare. I want to send the message, Mr. Speaker, that we do mean it. And I want to send the message that we're going to hold our ground. And I'd like to remind, Mr. Speaker, that there have been a whole series of shutdowns throughout history. And as I looked through some of those, and I have a list of them printed here, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 government shutdowns when Jimmy Carter was president. 5 of them. 5 incidents. One of them was over a nuclear battleship or a nuclear ship of some kind. And then the longest shutdown he had was 18 days. Does anybody remember those shutdowns from the 80s? Kind of. It didn't change my life that I remember. But that was Democrats in majority in the House and the Senate. They had a Democrat president. And their infighting caused government shutdowns for a total of 57 days. 57 days in between 77 and 1981. And sometimes Jimmy Carter won, sometimes the Democrats in the House and Senate prevailed over the President of the United States, all the same party. So if we don't remember the price paid for a government shutdown, if the inconvenience of it doesn't linger in anybody's memory, I'd take you to the era of Ronald Reagan, when there were a number of shutdowns on Ronald Reagan, fewer and for a shorter period of time. One of them was over $1 billion in social spending. And of that $1 billion, the government was shut down for about 3 days. And in that period of time, by the way, there was a Republican majority in the United States Senate. We had a principled Republican president, Democrats in the majority here in the House. The Democrats refused to agree with the President and the Senate. It resulted in a government shutdown. And in that shutdown that lasted, in the end, the $1 billion in spending that Democrats here wanted was negotiated down to $900 million. They gave up 10% of what they asked for, and the government was opened back up again. So, a determined majority in the House of Representatives prevailed to the level of 90% of their ask against a Republican majority in the Senate that opposed them, and a president who has clearly held his ground in case after case. It isn't clear who prevails in an issue like this, but I'll say this. The American people will judge our resolve and our determination. And the determination on who wins and who loses, if that actually matters, will be written by history. But I say this, Mr. Speaker, if we hold our ground, I believe there will not be a political price for House Republicans to pay. When House Republicans held their ground and eventually caved in 95 and 96, some say House Republicans lost that. They lost 8 seats in the following election. They did not lose the majority. 6 of those 8 seats were marginal seats they were likely to lose anyway. So perhaps they lost 2 congressional seats. Now, if we don't want to put at risk 2 congressional seats out of the House Republican majority to stand on the principle that cuts off all funding to implement and enforce Obamacare, is our fear for our political jobs greater than our love of principle and the people we represent? I would argue instead that there will not be political consequences for standing on principle and refusing to fund Obamacare. If there are political consequences, they will be recovered from over time. But we, Mr. Speaker, can never recover from Obamacare if it's implemented and enforced. That is the bottom line. No political consequences will be delivered to the people who stand up for the American people. That's the House Republican stance. That's the Senate conservative stance that came a little short over here a few minutes ago down the other side of the Capitol. But if we stand together as House Republicans, as Senate Republicans, as principled people who look back at that time and saw that Scott Brown came to the United States Senate because the blue state Massachusetts rejected Obamacare. There was a wave election in 2010 that elected 87 new House Republicans. Every one of them ran on repeal of Obamacare. Every Republican in the House and Senate has voted multiple times to undo, repeal, unfund, defund Obamacare. All of it stand together. It was bipartisan the last time. We had 2 Democrats that also agreed with us on this CR. We must stand on principle. If there's a political price to be paid for standing on principle, I say it's worth it. We can recover from any political price, even though I don't believe there will be anything but a political reward. But we can never recover if we allow Obamacare to be implemented or enforced. That's my stand, Mr. Speaker. That's the stand that I ask my colleagues to take today, tomorrow, the next day, and every day. If we hold together and we hold strong, in the end, the beneficiaries will be the American people and God-given liberty. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Iowa seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move the House do now adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
Earlier today, the House passed a number of bills, including one dealing with veterans programs. They will also return tomorrow to work on the continuing resolution back for morning hour 10 o'clock legislative work at noon Eastern. We will have live coverage of the House here on C-SPAN. They're back just because the